Hello, and welcome to Better Than Art School. This is another color mini lecture, and this is a two-part lecture. This is part one on color psychology, and there will be another one shortly following this one, so stay tuned for that. And so in all these color theory lectures, I've been talking about color theory from an optics standpoint, from kind of a soft physics kind of standpoint, from demonstrable color effects that you can achieve and see for yourself, like how one color can appear to be the same color as another color that's actually a very different color depending on what you surround it by and things like that. That's a relativity of color lecture. But you might have been wondering during all those lectures, why are these so scientific? Why are they so... it doesn't seem like the way I think about color when I paint or when I'm doing an artistic project. I think of color more emotionally and more psychologically. And so hopefully these lectures are for you. Okay. This is, if you had to assign the names Bouba or Kiki to these two shapes, which one would be Kiki and which one would be Bouba? And I think if you're not trying to be ironic or if you're trying to give the name that best suits the shape, I think maybe 85, 90% of people would say Kiki is the one on the left and Bouba is the one on the right. And Kiki, it's just obvious. Like the shape looks like the word Kiki in a way. It has these, so Kiki, it has these hard consonants and, you know, E sounds. And so it's very, the vowel and consonant repetition is very much like a sonic version of the visual of these hard, sharp, triangular shapes that comprise this character. And on the right, Bouba sounds kind of like oblong, rounded. Even the letters B-O-U-B-A even kind of look like these flowing, rounded shapes. So this is kind of like a version of synesthesia. If you've never heard of synesthesia, the easiest way to say it is it's kind of like maybe the wires get crossed in your brain and suddenly a month has a color in your mind. So every time you think of April, you think of the color yellow, or you hear a certain sound on a violin and you imagine blue violet or something like that. So that's called synesthesia. So it's like your brain taking two things that are different and then linking them, like it's almost like the wires are getting crossed. But this Kiki Bouba experiment kind of demonstrates that we all have a little bit of synesthesia. So synesthesia isn't just for the synesthetes. So you might have an extreme version of synesthesia, or you might just be a human in the world and have a sort of a more minor case. I bring all this up because we all have certain color associations. And we all have ways of seeing the world where color takes on a meaning beyond what the color would be by itself. Because remember back to the very first of the color theory lectures, color is just how your eyes and brain encode a wavelength of light. But because these codes are so distinct from each other, yellow is so distinctive from blue, and blue is very distinctive from red, and red's distinctive from green, and on and on and on, then you can overlay them onto certain ways of thinking about the world, and then certain things that are commonly coupled with other things become symbols for that thing. So, for instance, green and grass. Grass is almost always green. Of course, a lot of times it's actually yellow or yellow-green or other colors. But if you're trying to get across the idea of green and you don't want to have to paint a whole picture of green, grass, you could just show green and people kind of get the point. So you could say, how do these muted colors make you feel, this Andrew Wyeth painting? Or then you could say, how do these colors feel, these more intense saturated colors? It's a very different concept of color. The subject matter is almost the same. It's looking out of a window. But the colors are so different. These colors kind of advance forward. They look like they're less naturalistic. They look more artificial in some ways. These colors look more naturalistic. You might say, I've polled a lot of students on these. A lot of people say this feels kind of cold and maybe lonely. This one feels more like maybe you're in a room with other people, or this is kind of like a dreamlike memory that's a little more happy in some ways. And I asked people which one was painted in Maine and which one was painted in California, and most people realize this one is from Maine and this one's from California. So on and on and on. But here's another example. If you had to let one of these kids babysit your child, who would you choose? I think most people would choose Erasmus here on the left, because he just looks more mild-mannered, and the background is kind of this analogous palette, or these colors kind of close together, whereas the guy on the right, his expression coupled with that bright red background makes him think he would probably, do something terrible to my children if I left them with him. So this is just an example of how, now if he had a kind of a quirky little smile on the red background, you might think it's a Valentine's Day ad or something. So red can be context dependent, but it's usually an intense emotion, whether it's lust or love or hate. But I'll talk about individual colors in the second color and psychology lecture. So color psychology, it's a study of influence of color on human emotion and behavior. And it's a gooier study than the way we study optics or other things that have been in the other lectures, where I can actually demonstrate that color is relative. These things are a little more subjective. But here's 6 basic principles of color psychology. Color can carry specific meaning. Color's meaning can be innate, cultural, or personal. I'm going to hit those in the next lecture. Color perception is automatic. You don't have to think about it. Color can be proven to affect other sensory modalities like taste, smell, body temperature. Okay, so an example of this is I used to play a little trick on my brother, and I would put red food coloring in 7-Up and tell him it was wild cherry 7-Up, and he would taste it and go, whoa, it's so delicious, and I go, hee hee hee. But, basically the red had fooled him. Color exerts an influence on behavior. Definitely does. If you are forced to hang out in a room that's brightly yellow all the time, you're going to maybe get a little anxious, things like that. Color meaning is dynamic and context dependent, so that one's pretty obvious. So the color meaning that you assign to it is going to change, kind of like what I said with that guy in the previous slide with the red background. If he was smiling, you would think of him differently than if he was making that stern expression. Okay, so individual colors have their own psychological properties, and that's what we're going to pick up in the second lecture. So to be continued, and I'll see you then.